Right. We are live on YouTube, I hope. And we're ready to get started. Let's share the screen. I hope you all can see my screen. And sorry about that. Yep. I hope you all can see my screen. Today we are starting with what we call Django. All right. Django models. Django models. So for those of you who have been with us from the beginning, you know where we started from and where we've gotten to. But for the sake of those of you who haven't been here or happen to be joining us for the first time or watching this as a first video, what you need to know is that we have done a couple of videos in the past. The videos are all available on YouTube that you can always look at, but the most important thing that I want you to take is that Django as a web framework follows a particular architecture pattern known as the MVT model. So MVT, where M stands for models, and V stands for views, T stands for templates. Okay. And out of these three things, you would have to really understand how every one of them works to give you your application that you're building or the Django projects that you're working on. And we've dealt with every one of them in the past, except the models. So the last time we met here, we talked about templates and how to use them. Before that, we talked about views. But in simple terms, templates are most like the presentation layer of your application. So if you're building something, the interface that the end user is going to see, which is usually made up of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, those will be captured in the template. But aside that, we also have the views where there is the logic part of your application. So if there is anything that you need to gather, maybe gather some data from the database and manipulate the data, then eventually show it up in the front end of your application, all those logic will be done in the views. If somebody is inputting something into your website and you need to validate something, like all this logic, any logical aspect of your application can be handled in the views. And we've talked about that. Now let's talk about models. So if you're building such an application, one of the key things that you'd have to pay attention to is your database. So you're going to have to add or attach a database to your application. And a database is essentially that which would you are going to use to store your data. So any data that you're collecting on your website, you're going to be able to store it in a database. Also, if you have any specific data that is about you that you are going to even display on the front end, but then it is not just one data, and you may already check for certain information before displaying that data, that is wanting to display dynamic data on your front end, you can equally put this data in your database. But in Django, remember, we are working with Python. Python is not a database. It's not a database language. So how then are we able to even communicate with a database? That is where the models come into play. So models, please pay attention to the English word model. When we say a model, that is just a representation of something, right? So what we actually have in Django is when we talk about a model, it is a representation of a database table. If you have learned anything about databases in the past, especially if you have learned about relational databases in the past, then the word tables, as I used, saying database tables, will resonate with you. But if you don't know anything about database, please do not beat yourself. When you take, for an instance, what we call a relational database, it is simply like a table. And I want to believe that majority of you might have worked with a spreadsheet before, spreadsheets like Excel or Google Sheets. In there, you usually have the data captured in this format where we have columns and rows for collecting the data, right? Sometimes you have some headings in the columns and the rest of the data. So say you have names here, or first name, last name, and age, every other information will be there. Then here, say Obed, okay, first name is Obed, last name is Ehoneah, age is 1,000 years, and every other information. So this can be considered as a database table if you have such a table in any of the database management applications, right? Let's not bore you with all of those things. All I need you to know is that the model is just a representation. If we say models, this person is a model. All that person is that they're a representation of some sort of ideal. Listen, if I can call it, like, if you say this person is a model, what does the person model? They represent something. So usually they model for a brand to represent the brand, and they show us what it really looks like. Okay. So what Django models are is that they are a representation of what your database table should look like. So when I create my model, all I'm doing is that I'm saying, okay, this is how my database table should look like, just a single table. And I'm going to give it all of these things. But remember, each table is made up of columns and what? Rows. Columns and rows. Technically, we call the columns as fields. So if you talk about the field, some people also call it attributes. That's also possible, but then technically you call it fields. Then the rows are referred to as records. So if you're learning anything about databases, especially if you are doing relational databases, these are the terminologies that you're going to be hearing: fields, records. And the fields are like the columns, the column names. So in this specific example that I used here, name is a field, or first name is a field, last name is a field, age is a field. But then if you talk about the records, then we are looking at whose specific information is here. Like Obed's information is here. That is one record. Then maybe I add Felix's information here. That would be another record. Then Nixon's information here, that's another record. So the rows refers to as records. When we are creating models in Django, essentially all we are doing is giving our database table a name, right? And also stating what the fields should be. That is the basis of Django's model. Creates a database table, give it a name, right? Name of a database table. Then list of the fields. List of the fields that it should have. For each of these fields that you are going to state, you have to tell us what type of data they should be looking out for. Because note that here, for example, we have first name, we have last name, we have age. The type of data is different. If you've learned any sort of programming language before, you know that one of the basic things that we learn about is data types. the type of data matters a lot, because how we store them, the memory they take, and all of that, it's important. If you haven't learned a low-level programming language before, maybe you haven't ever thought about the reason why you need to state them. But if you have learned any low-level programming language like C before, then you will appreciate why data types matters, because it really tells you need to be aware of the data type to be able to know how much memory you are going to allocate for this. So when you are creating your model, that's one of the things that you're going to do. You're supposed to tell it the type of data, so type of data that each field is going to take. Then, even in telling it the type of data, there are some options that you can also provide that the field has to obey. So for instance, I can tell that, oh, I do not want any, so this particular field, let's say the age field, always the age field is required. The person cannot provide their information and leave out the age field. So I can go ahead and say that, hey, I do not want any of the values that is captured under age to be null. Like, it's compulsory. You need to fill that, right? There are several other options that can be provided. In summary, all that I've said is that when we talk about creating models in Django, we are looking at having a representation of one database table. A database table is made up of fields and records, but the model itself is just more like the name of the table and the column names. That is all. Column names in this sense is known as the fields or the field name. But then for the field, you also have to tell us how the field should behave. So what type of data should the field have, and what other options should the field observe? I hope that is clear. Once we understand that, we get into the code, it becomes easy for us. We say that the model is a representation of a database table, but then more importantly, it gives us a table name and also gives us the fields. But not just the fields, we are also interested in what type of data each field is going to contain and what other options should each field obey. That is the most important thing about models. Okay. Any questions up to here? All right. No questions. Let's move on then. So now that we know what that is, let me branch a bit and talk about what we refer to as ORMs. Because if you've started learning programming and you've not done anything relating to databases, or you know about databases, but you do not really have a full grasp of databases, because ideally you are supposed to learn a language that is used to interact with a database. So for instance, if I take a relational database like MySQL, I have to learn SQL as a query language that I'm going to use to query the database. I'm going to use to create the database, because one, you have to create the database, you have to connect to it before you can even query it. So you have to go and learn all of those things. But I am a Python developer. I do not know SQL yet. Maybe. I mean, I'm putting, this is not me describing myself. I'm saying that that is a possibility, that there's someone who knows Python. He's already just started learning Python or has some knowledge in Python. Is yet to learn any sort of programming relating to databases. How does this person then go ahead to create a database and also write all the queries necessary to get the data they want? Even if you already know it, you know that it's tiring for you to be writing multiple languages at the same time. You're writing some in Python, you're writing some in SQL, and making sure that everything is working the way you want it to work is a bit tiring. So to avoid that, the concept of ORMs were introduced. And ORMs represent object relational mappers or mapping. And what it means is that instead of you learning Python and learning SQL, so that now you use SQL to connect to your database, you use SQL to create the database, you use SQL to create the fields, and now begin to query the data with SQL. You don't have to go that route. If it is Python that you're writing in, do everything with Python. So ORM is like an interface that has been built for us so that we do not have to go and learn the database specific language. Remember, there are a lot of databases out there. And even if you take relational database like SQL databases, there are different drivers for these ones. And each of them, I would say there are different vendors. Like each of them has its own syntax. They have unique syntaxes for some operations. That means that if you are using PostgreSQL and I am using my SQL, there are two different ways that we may have to write a particular thing. So to write it for Postgres will be a bit different from how you write it from MySQL. So imagine if I now have to learn for every one of the databases available so that when I'm creating my project, I can switch to any database at any point in time. So maybe when I started with SQL, or I started with MySQL, or even SQLite, which is the one that we're going to be using in this project. And later we are going to production, and SQLite cannot survive or cannot, it's not ideal for the kind of production environment. We are expecting millions of users on this application, so we cannot use SQLite. Then we have to change to PostgreSQL. Imagine, so in that scenario, specific scenario, I would have to have learned the language to interact with SQLite and also learn the language to interact with PostgreSQL. That is a lot of work. To avoid all of these, ORMs have abstracted those ones so that all I need to do is to write my simple Python language, like write everything in Python. And behind the scene, Python will be converted to communicate with the specific database that has been chosen. So the developers behind these programming languages have brought in this concept known as object relational mapping, where it maps various objects that we create. And this goes into OOP. For those of you who are aware of what it is, object-oriented programming. Come on, I was going to say relational mapping again. Yeah, so OOP is object-oriented programming. All right, so if you've learned anything about those, which is you've learned about classes, objects, inheritance, polymorphism, all of those stuff, right? We are going to at least start using some of these things in here just because we are about to do ORMs. But the advantage is that now we do not need to learn any database specific language. All we need is to pick an object in Python and manipulate the object using maybe what are the attributes of this object that we can use, what are the methods that we can use, can we inherit from this, and all of those things. And that makes things very easy for us. So pretty much what we need to do. Two more things before we get into writing code for today. I'm trying to explain these things. You're going to see them in action shortly, but then so that you have the basic knowledge before you get to see them, and it makes it easy for you to comprehend them when you get to see them. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is a concept known as migration. In Django, so remember, we are talking about Django, but this applies to a lot of other web frameworks out there because ORMs you meet in almost At least I've seen ORMs in almost every framework I've worked with. Yep. Yep. You find it migration, the concept of migration. I remember in Laravel, you see migration. Yeah. So these are concepts that cut across most of the web frameworks that you would meet, especially the full stack web frameworks. A lot of them you are likely to meet these. So, what are migrations and when do we use them? In Django, when after you have created your model, you have just described what the database table should look like, the name, the field, what type of data should this field take, what possible options should this field obey. That is just a description of the database table. It is not the actual creation of the table. Remember that ideally you should have written some SQL or some database specific code to create the database. So when you create a model in Django, all you have done is a description. You haven't done anything else apart from describing the representation. So you have the representation of your database, but you are yet to create the database. So how then do you manage to create the database? The first thing you want to do is to make a migration. When you say make a migration, essentially all you are doing is you're making a migration file. Okay, so that's the first thing. Pay attention here. The first thing is we are going to make a migration. So make migration. But as I said, when I say make migration, you are just making a migration file. What does this mean? So anytime that you make changes to your model, you have to go and tell your database like, hey, all these changes have been made and we need to update the database to reflect the changes that have been made to the database, right? And for the first time, if you have just created a model, you have not already created a database. So you have to prepare, let Django be aware of the new changes, the additional models that you have created, the information that you have brought into the models. So we say you are making a migration, and in this case, you make a migration file. And that file that will be created, eventually you are going to use that file to do the actual migration. So that is when you actually migrate. So there are two steps. The first one is to make the migration. And when you make the migration, you're just making a migration file. This file contains all the new changes that has been made to any of your models, your whole project that you're working in, any model, any database representation in your project. If there has been changes to it, then this file will capture those changes. So that as soon as you say migrate, when you say it should migrate, it takes up this data in the migration file and convert it behind the scene, convert it to SQL commands and execute those SQL commands. I hope it makes sense. So, for instance, I'm saying SQL because in our specific case, we are using SQLite as the default database. Maybe along the line, as we keep learning, we'll learn how to switch the database to something else and how does it impact any other thing we've learned. For now, let's focus on SQLite and how we go about it. So it's simple. It's as simple as this. We go into our application right now. We want to add a database. Remember, from our last session, we created the templates, the views, we manipulated everything, but then the data that we're using were hard coded into it. So this time around, we want to create a database, put all our blog posts in those database or any other information about our company that we want to display on the website in the database. Then we now, to be able to create a database in the first place, we have to model the database, have a representation of it. What should be the name of the database table? What are the fields that should be in there? What type of data should any of these fields be or each of these fields be? Then what are the possible options that these fields should obey? All of these will be captured in your model. After you've written it, it's like me writing to you and saying, okay, I want you to prepare me a table. For this table that I want you to make, The table should have this length, that height, use this type of wood, and make sure it has this, not that. Like, I give you the representation of the table I want. After I have written all of that, it doesn't mean I have made a table. I hope that makes sense. I've written my model of the table. It's just a representation of what my table should look like. Or possibly I could even have drawn the table. I want my table to look like this. But the fact that I have drawn a table doesn't mean I've made a table. I now have to make the migrations. The migrations is looking at all the things I've done. What are the new changes? What are things that have is supposed to be considered in making the table? So now I create a file, an official file of what the database table should really look like. Then finally, I migrate. So if I migrate, that is a process, the time that I am actually building the table or building the database table in this case, except that it is done behind the scene. So you and I do not get to see it. All we see is the outcome, that as soon as it is done, we know that our database table is ready, and now we can put data in it. Let me see the charts. Okay, so Redis or other NoSQL. Yeah, hopefully as we go forward, we'll explore all of those ones. All right. Now we've talked about make migration, we talk about migrate, and I hope you all understand it so that as soon as we start writing the code, all these things are easy for you to see. Are we okay to start writing code? Or does anyone has any question for me?
It looks good.
All right, it's good. And so some of you were asking about the HTML files. I uploaded that to GitHub. So hopefully you should find it on GitHub. Let's see. On GitHub, I think. I mean, that's for last week's session. But this week's session as well, I will put it up there. Something about Django, right? I think that's how we, yeah, Django series. And change the branch to lesson 3. Then the HTML files are here. So those of you who were asking for it, this is where you find it. And you find every other thing that we did up to last time here. So let me create a new branch so that we begin working from there. The get checkout branch name. Let's call this lesson 4, right? Okay. Sorry, let me move around this Zoom handlers. They are distracting me. Okay, so lesson 4 it is. When we are done, I'll push this as well to get hub. All right. But we are still using this lesson 2 directory because that's where the project is. And for now, let's focus on our blog. And let me activate the environment. Environment is in my env. So okay, we are in Django, so we need to cd into Django lesson 2. Then here, from here, we can get into my env. Oh, what's happening? My env Django lesson 2. Okay.
Doc,
My
you're using Git Bash.
Yep. Okay. Hmm. Does that's blah blah blah. I hope the environment is activated. Okay, yeah. So it is activated here. All right. So now we can start our project by running Python manage. Please, I hope you all saw what I did. And I was reminded you are using Git bash. So this is more of a Linux environment. So I had to use source this instead of just running it like we do in the Windows environment. But I think, yeah, once you're in Windows, I think either way should work. Manage.py and let's run server and see. Oh no, what is happening? Okay, let's see. Pip install. So just hope this thing works. She must at least have one requirement to install. Pip install requirements. Oh my, what is going on? You're attempting to install package later. No, flag to install the packages listed. Okay. I think last week when I was trying to push the things to GitHub, I was having some issues. So I ended up deleting the environment that we're using. Let's see if everything works fine. I really do not want to start the whole project again. Not at all. Not right now. Because I want us to finish hopefully it should work now. I want us to finish at least the basis, then we start another project. That will make more sense. Okay, so now let's try Python manage.py run server. And hopefully this works. Okay, by default, when you start, and if you have been observant so far, you'd have seen this particular error. Anytime you start the server, it gives you this particular error. It says you have 18 unapplied migrations. Your project may not work properly until you apply the migrations for apps, admin, auth, content type sessions. So these apps that you see, admin, auth, content type sessions, were by default created by Python. Those apps has been created and their migration files has been created by Python. Sorry, by Django, I mean, by default. And they give you access to your admin side, the authentication, and all of those stuff. If you want these things to be created in your database, then you have to migrate all of these migration files. There are about 18 of them that has not been migrated yet. Okay, but before we do that, I want us to take a look at what we currently have. This is what we have. Right. Oh, what is happening? Must we say page? Interesting. Is that what we did? Is your my company, yours.
If you don't put anything there, you should run the home page. That's what we do.
So why is it
URL.
misbehaving? Where is it getting the page from? That's strange. No way. No. So I guess this is pulling from a different project, not this particular project. That's interesting. Okay. So I really do not know why it would behave like that, but let's try running with a different port, say 9,000, just to be sure that maybe I have a different project running and we are not aware of that. Okay, so this is port 9,000. Good. So yeah, just as I said, it was a different project. Maybe one of my testing projects. Okay. So now we are sure. And yeah, let me just mention it. So you see that you can actually change the ports just by using where was it? Where did I run the command? Yeah. So you just pass the port number after run server and it will choose the specific port number you give it. If you do not choose a specific port number, then by default it's going to use the port 8000. But if something else is running on port 8000, then you cannot have access to what you are currently working on. So it's good that it came up so that I show you that we are now running it on port 9000. Okay. So we have this and we have slash blog. This gives us this blog, right? But currently this data is coming. We wrote it ourselves. It's not in any database. So we want to be able to put it into a database. So the first thing you want to do is create a representation of what the data should look like in a database. And this you'd have to really understand your need or your use case. In this specific example, we have a blog. The blog has a blog title. It has, so we can even go into it. We have a blog title. We have who the author, we have when it was posted, and we have the content. A blog can have many other things. So it is totally up to you to start planning out those things. So ideally, when you are building an application, you draw out all your, we call them entity relational diagrams, right? You draw all of those things to now know, okay, I'm going to be building this database that, I mean, quickly do a Google search for you to see what I'm referring to. And TT relationship diagrams. Okay. All right. So images. Let's look at images. Yeah, something like this. I don't you want to show up. Okay. So as you can see on this side, we have authors, publishers, books, shopping basket, book, customer, shopping basket, warehouse, book, warehouse. So I believe that this is some, or it's a bookstore or maybe an online bookstore sort of e-commerce platform where somebody is building and all the various data is being modeled. This is how the data that we are collecting, how they are related to each other, and you're modeling it as such. So when you're about to build things like this is some of the process that you go through. For now, we are not going to do any complex thing. We are not looking at any sort of relationship. We are just focusing on understanding how to use models in Django. Then subsequently, we can look at all these relationships and how to achieve them. But something that is worth knowing about entity relationship diagrams. Okay, let's go back. So now we need to do something for this model that we have. I told you that in creating Django models, the first thing is we need to give it a name, right? And that name is what would tell Django the name of your database. So in our case, we can call this blog. We can call the model blog, right? Then this blog model, what are the fields that it should contain? We know that it should contain a title field. We know it should contain the main content or body. We know that it should contain the date that it was created. So we can say created at, and we know it should also, okay, so one of the other things that you usually do is anytime it's updated, you want to have the updated time. You almost always want to keep this true because this was when it was created, but how often was it updated, or when was the last time it was updated? So that if a blog post was created in 2002 and has not been updated again since then you know that it is outdated. But if it was created 2002, but the last update was 1 month ago, then you know that it is still up to date. Okay, so at least you have that idea. We can do the author and several other information, but for now, I want us to stick to this because I do not want to introduce authentication in here and also association, relationships, and stuff in here. Just want you to focus on understanding how models work and see how we're going to use it before we later look at all those other things, just so no one is confused. Okay, so we have our title, we have contents, and we have created art and updated art. Those are the things that we are going to have. The title, what type of data should this be? So there are a lot of options that it can be, but if you know your primitive data types, depending on the programming language you are using. But yes, we are using Python. So in Python, one of the primitive data types that you would come across is a string. I want to believe that is true. If it is not true, please tell me. Maybe I've forgotten my Python basis, but I think there is a string, right? So this is likely to be like a string, okay? But in database terminologies, these are captured a bit different. And when you talk about Django specifically, they are captured a bit different. So now we need to know, okay, the various field types. Remember, these are fields, okay? They are the field names or field headings. Field. So the type of data is known as a field type. In Django, we have a lot of them, and the string, the common one that you see, string is known as the char type, char field. And they are written in this format, or some will pronounce it as char field, right? We also have text field, where char field is like string that is not too long. So the title would be the char field, but the content, which is a lot of tests, okay, would be text field. If you're working with a database language like SQL, you would see something like for the char field in SQL, we usually have it as varchar, right? And we have the test field as tests. So depending on the programming language that you are working in or the database language that you are working in, they may be called a bit differently. Okay, we can have integer field and several other. There are a lot of them. I'll show you as soon as we start typing. I'll show you some of them. Okay,
Date time field.
thank you. So there's date time and a lot of others. But for now, our created art and our updated as let's just use dates. So dates field. So these are some of the things that you really want to know when it comes to working with the Django model. What are the various field types? You do not have to memorize every one of them, but at least the very common ones that you're going to use, like these four, are very common that you're going to use. So you should be aware of these four. As for the rest, as and when you are modeling your data, you're trying to establish the relationship and or you'd have to figure out for this type of data, what is the best data type that I need to use in this case. All right, so that is what we need. Then for each of these, there are possible options. So for the options, you usually put them in brackets like this. The options will be captured here. So for instance, if I have a field where I do not want the field to be null, then I have to set and say null is equal to say false. A field like a field type like the char field, you have to tell it the length. So it requires the length. What is the maximum length that it should take? Because you say it is a string, but how long of a string? Remember, data types. If at least you know some low level programming, it tells them how much space they should allocate in the database for the data that is expected. And you do not want to use a very waste the memory. That's what I should say. You do not want to waste the memory. So for our char field or car field, depending on who taught you English, you can go ahead and say that the max length, max underscore length is equal to, then you give it a value, say 100. That's all. For text field, you do not necessarily have to give it the length or anything. So that will work. Integer field, I think that also you do not give it a length, and that should work. So for now, we are going to use, in our case, this will be the test, the title will be the char field, then content will be test field, then created art, and these ones will be date field. So that is what we're going to use. Then for the date field, one option that we can use, which is, or let me give you two possible options that we can use. There is what we call auto underscore now, and there is auto underscore now add. So these are options that we can provide to the date field. If we choose the auto now or auto underscore now, let's start with created art, right? So created art, if we set auto now to be true, we say this is equal to true inside created art. All that we are saying is that the date that you are creating this thing should be when, please remember, this is not the model itself, right? When you're adding a record to it, if I create a blog post, the date that I'm creating the blog post, that should be recorded as the date for the created art. That is all. But if you are using just auto now, what it means is that anytime updates are made or changes are made to that record, the current date would be the one that will be used. So the difference between the auto add and the, sorry, auto now and the auto now add is that for the auto now add, it captures only once. If a record is added now and it captures it, it's not going to be updated automatically. Auto now add captures it once. It's not going to update automatically. So that means that for our created art date, created art, we are going to use the option auto now add, because we want to capture only the time or the date that it was created. Don't make any changes to it subsequently, even when we have made changes to that record. But for updated art, we want to use the auto now, which means that anytime an update is made to it, update the date. I hope it makes sense. Auto now add to be true. That means that it is the first time that you are adding data, you are adding the record, that I should add current date. I add it and that is all. I don't do anything to it again. That is the duty of the auto now add. So I captured it once. But for updated ads, we need to update the date all the time when changes are made to the record. So for that particular one, we use auto now. All right. I hope we are okay with that and we can go create our models. All right. So down here, if you look at the, let's go into blog. In our blog app, there is a folder. So we didn't probably talk about migrations in the past match. Like we didn't talk much about it, but you can see that there's a directory here called migrations. Currently, there is nothing inside. It's just the cache files and init file, right? But if we make any migration, that is where the migration file will be put. We will soon see that. But then there is also models.py where we are going to be creating our models. So let's go ahead and create our models. Our models are Python classes. Remember, we are doing OOP related stuff. Right? This is object-oriented programming. So our model is a Python class. If you remember, a Python class can be declared with the keyword class and the name of the class. And the name, by convention, should start with a capital letter. So in our case, we are going to say blog. But one important thing is that this model that you are creating should inherit from a parent model that Django comes with by default. So please pay attention. Anytime you are creating a model, it should inherit from, remember, this thing was there. We didn't have to import it. It was imported for us. So from these models, we are going to actually be inheriting from model. So this is what we are interested in. And pay attention. Every model you create, you are going to start with the class, the name of the model, then you inherit from model, which is coming from this models. So you have models dot model. So this is the model, and this is the actual class that you inherit from. Okay. Then in here, you just go ahead and tell us the specific field. So we have title, and we say title is equal to the character type, sorry, the character field or char field, but then it's a field type. That's what I wanted to say. So the field type, we get it from still models. Remember, from these models, we are going to get a lot of things that we want. So from models, we are looking for char field. And you remember that I said we put options in here, and for char field, one particular option that we can put in there is the max length. So max underscore length is equal to then say 100. That means that the maximum your title should be is 100 characters. Let's increase it to 200. Okay. Then the next thing is content. So we say content is equal to models dot this time around. So you see, as soon as I said dot, there are a lot of things that came up, and this is a lot that you can use. And when you see any of them with field, that means that those are types of fields that you can actually use for your database that you are creating, right? There are a lot of them. You don't need to memorize them, just need to know the basic ones. Then anytime you are modeling a database that you are not sure what type of data this should be, you can always look it up. So this would be a test field. Then that we don't have any options. We don't need any options. Let's proceed to say created at and say this is equal to models dot created at should be a date field. And we've talked about what options to give it. So here we are going to set auto now add to be true. Struggling to see because of Zoom. Okay. Yep. So let's do updated at and say this is also models dot also date type. Then in here will be auto now. I hope we all remember the difference between the two. So auto now add, it adds it only one time. There will be no updates for as long as the date has been captured. But auto now is anytime changes are made to this, is going to record it. Okay. So now we have created the representation of our data. But this particular data that we have represented here, our database table should have this name and these fields and field types as well as options, right? But we haven't created a database yet. All we have right now is a description of what the database should look like. How then do we go ahead to create the database? First, we need to create a migration file. That is the file that will determine all the changes that needs to be done or the database that needs to be created. the file that will contain all those information. So that will be the first thing we need to do. And once we are done with that, we should go ahead and migrate it for us to now have access to it. Okay, so let's proceed to, let me pull up a new show and cd into Django version lesson 2. Okay, then in here, since I'm in a Windows environment, it is my, nope, what are you calling this one? Was it not my, uh, my env, my env? Okay, then script, activate this. All right, so now that has been activated. The command, please, if you, anytime you forget any of the commands that we are doing, we need to use. Okay, the last time I showed you that you can easily type, say, Django admin to get a list of all the commands, right? So you have a list of all the commands. One thing that you can do if you are interested in is to pick these things and try reading around it. What does app do? What does start project do? Test server. What do all of these things do? Okay. And as we keep building projects, we would explore some of them. For now, apart from that, we can also equally use that Python manage.py without any command, and it will give you a list of possible options that you can use. So here we have change user, create super user, remove this, blah, blah, blah. But let's look for migration. So there is one on make migrations. Then there is another on migrate. So, and there is also show migrations. So if anything, what we are interested in right now is to make the migration file. So we are going to use this command, make migrations. So I come here and I say Python manage. Remember, before we did this, we're getting the error message that we have 18 unapplied migrations. So that came with Python itself. And now we are about to create our own migration. So py Python manage, I mean, that came with Django itself. I keep using Django, Python instead of Django. Please understand if I ever say that again. So Python manage.py, then we're interested in make migrations. Make migrations. Okay. If I hit enter now, see for yourself in here, it says that this has been created. Migrations for blog has been created, and it can be found here in this directory, blog migrations, and it is called 001 underscore initial.py. So if you come into the blog app and look into migrations, you'll find that we now have this new file 0001 underscore initial.py. That is the migration that was created for us. So if we open that file, this is what is in the file. It's a migration file. That's a class that was created and gives information on all the changes that has been done. Now it says these changes is for us to create this particular model. And the name is blog with all these fields, right? Not so different from how we wrote our model, but this has been converted into a migration file so that as soon as we migrate it, our database will be created. Now we have a file to migrate. When we run Python manage.py migrate, is going to, behind the scene, run some SQL commands and create a database for us. How do we know this? Right now, if you run it, it's just going to do the magic and show us. But then there is a way for us to know exactly what SQL commands is going to be creating if we allow it. And let me show you one of the commands here that you can use to do that. So down here, you see SQL migrates. Let's look for that, SQL migrates. So this particular command will show us the various SQL commands the SQL command that is going to be run if we should do the migration right now. Okay, so even if you don't know how to use SQL migrate, you can still go ahead and say python manage.py and say SQL migrate so that it gives you an idea of what you should do, because that is not the right way to use it. Because now it's telling you if you need to do it, well, you need extra information than what you just have. And there are the following arguments are required. It requires the app label and the migration name. The app that we are using is blog. That's blog app. And the migration name is this one that you can see, the 0001 underscore initial. So instead of just saying SQL migrate, now we are going to add blog, which is the app label that they refer to, and the migration name is 001 underscore initial. Okay, so now let's run this and see what it tells us. So if you can see, I have to keep moving this zoom thing all around. But if you can see from my screen right now, it says this is, so create model. If you know anything about SQL, you know that this is a comment, right? Then the command, or the command, if I should call it, is create table. So it is creating a table, blog underscore blog. Where is this coming from? This blog is the app name, and this underscore blog, the second blog, is the model name, but in lowercase letters. So if you called your model anything else, in this case, we called it blog. That is why we have it as underscore blog. Whatever name you gave it here, that will be the name here. So it is your app name underscore your model's name. Then what is it doing? It is automatically creating an ID. Remember, when we created it, we did not add an ID. But in every database, you always have to create an ID, or what you refer to as a primary key, that can easily be used to identify an element. And it has to be unique in the specific database table so that you can easily identify an item. So Django by default adds that ID for us. And maybe in subsequent lessons, we'll explore it further. For now, just know that you do not even need to worry much about it. Django will automatically take care of that for you. So you have an auto incrementing ID here. That means the first block that we add to the database will have ID 1. The next one will have ID 2, ID 3, like that. All right. Then we have title, which we created, and see, it has been converted to what we refer to as varchar. And we called it what? Char field, right? But in SQL, it is called varchar. Then we have content. The content is supposed to be what? Test. We called it test field. That is what it is in Django, but in SQL, it's called test. The same as for created at, it is called date in SQL, but we called it date field. So that's exactly the command that is going to run when we run migrate. So let me go ahead and run migrate, and I'll read from the chat what it is. And if you have any questions as well, I'm happy to take it before we move on. Manage.py, then this time around, all we need is migrate. So after you make migrations, then you migrate. Let's see. Okay, so now all those migrations have been applied. Apply all migrations. So now it has applied the migration for admin, alt, blog, content type, sessions. You remember initially the error that we were having said, where is that error? Yeah. So it said admin, alt, content type, sessions. These 4 apps, we had not applied their migrations, but now all 4 of them together with our 5th one, which is the blog that we created, has been applied. What this means is that the database has been created now. So the database table has been created now. So unfortunately, I cannot view the SQLite file here. If you have, I think there are extensions in VS Code that can allow you view SQLite file. If you view it, you may see that the tables have been added, but we haven't even added records to the table, except that you'd have seen that of the admin and co. Okay, that beside the points. Now we have created our database tables. What next? Let me read from the chart. Anything interesting? So doing hard things. Funny to see how all these models already come with Django. ALS made us write our own code for them. They wanted you to understand. Yeah, I mean, if you didn't understand these things, now they would look strange to you, right? But you've done object-oriented programming before, you've done all of those things. So it's easy for you to appreciate this. And you don't just stand up and go to do use frameworks. Like you really need to understand behind the hood. So for me, I'm almost always curious and trying to enter into these things and go and see this particular model. What exactly is in there? Okay, there's a lot of things in here. This one, what does this particular thing do? So that you really understand it. If it is just surface level knowledge, you can't really manipulate it. And one thing about Django is that it's very configurable. It allows you to make changes to even the core of it. So if you really understand the language, you should be able to delve into it, change things, and let it suit your own need. Some people get stuck with, oh, the framework I'm using does not permit this. Then that's all. That's the end of what they want to do. They want to do something in particular, but the framework they are using does not permit them. You do not need it. Okay, it says install what the SQLite extension. Don't worry, I really do not need it right now. All right, but thanks for the recommendation. Okay, yeah, I hardly use SQLite, so it's just because of our Django series. That's why we are using it. All right, now we've migrated it. And you guys remember that this Django app came by default with an admin app, right? And we've gone there once before. There is login, but you and I know that we do not have, since we started, we have not created any user. Like we don't have any username and password. So how will we then be able to access these database tables that have been created for us? We have run the migrations. They have been created for us, but we don't have any user in here. So we have to create a user. The first user you want to create is a super user that has access to all the admin stuff. Okay, that's the first one we want to use. And if you remember, when I did the Python manage.py, see what I just did here. Manage.py, it gave us a list of commands, and among the first was create super user. So this is the command you need to create super user. So to create a super user, all I have to do is to say Python manage. You see how Django is very easy? I don't know. Guys, tell me that I'm not just excited because
Django is very sweet, doctor.
yeah, it feels that everything you need is in here. Like, I mean, the commands, I don't know, I don't have to memorize the commands. I can easily have access to it. Other web frameworks, you'd have to go to the documentation to go and look at it and say, oh, I'm looking for something like this, right? So yeah, I mean, let's give Django its flowers. Okay, so create super user. That's a command, and it will ask us to give a username. So I'm going to give it Ehoneah Obed as my username. Email address Ehoneah Obed at hotmail.com. That will be my email address. Password, obviously, I'm not going to say the password I put here. And I'm typing, you're not seeing anything, but yes, I've typed a password. So don't freak out if you keep typing and nothing shows up. I know how frustrating people feel when they are doing this, especially those of us who started ALS using web terminal. People will copy and paste and nothing is happening. Like, but I just pasted my password. I'm trying to type my password, nothing is happening. Okay. Now I don't even know if I've typed in here or not. But it's for security purposes. That's why they do not show the password in the terminal. But as you can see, it says super user created successfully. So now if I go here and I enter the username I created, and if I remember the right password I used, it should log me in. Great. This has logged me in. That is cool. So this is the Django admin dashboard for us. See, one thing I love about Django is the admin dashboard that automatically is created for you. Guys, you may not know why I'm excited about this, but the point is that building an admin dashboard is one of the most difficult things that you will do as a developer. See, you are almost always excited about the main application that you're building, but to manage the application, especially if it's going to be content driven, to manage that application, you can't always go into the code to write it. Let's say in this blog management app that we are building, we are going to be creating blog posts, and we can't always go and use code, write code to create it. What if we now leave this project, we hand it over to someone else who is not techie, someone else who doesn't know Django or Python? They should still be able to use a backend interface to put data on your front end interface that you have. So that is usually one of the big things. And you realize that most developers will end up building the app itself and take forever to build a back end. I mean, the dashboard, back end dashboard, or admin dashboard, if I should call it, right? It takes them forever to build it. So knowing very well that Django will automatically create something for me like this is one of the reasons why I love Django. All right, let's proceed. We can see that we have groups and we have users. And when I click on users, we can see my name, my email address. So this which I created is already here. But then you remember that we said we created the groups and users. These are database tables that came by default with Django. So where is our blog database table? We said the database table was created, and we can only see that of groups and users, but we can't see that of our blog. What is happening? Where has our blog gone to? We have to go and look for it. We no go agree give them. We no go agree give our blog. Where has it gone to? So one thing that we have to be aware is that the admin dashboard itself is an app that Django has created or came with by default with Django. Okay, we have created a new database table called block, but then we are yet to tell the app, we are yet to tell the admin app that, hey, we have a model called block, therefore let that model show on the admin interface. So there is still something else we need to do. Remember, when we create the model, that we start by creating a model, by going into models.py, create a model, describe it, how it should look like. Then afterwards, we make migrations so that the migration file is created with all the changes that needs to be reflected in the database. Then we finally migrate. After we migrate, the database table has been created or the changes has been updated. It has been updated with the most recent changes. But for it to show in the Django administration or admin dashboard, we need to tell it. So how do we tell it? Right here within our own blog app, you can see that we have a file called or a script called admin.py, and that is where we register our models. So here, if we come and we want to register our model, admin has been imported here. That is the app that we have, the admin app. So for it to show up on the admin site, we have to say admin.site. What are we doing? We are registering our model. So the register then we put our model name. But that means that we have to also import our model. A model can be found in the models.py file, and our model is called blog. So back in admin, we are going to say we are importing from the model. So inside this very directory, models, models, then what are we importing? We are importing blog. Okay, so now we can go ahead and register blog here. That easy. Let me read the chat. I can see what's okay. What fight is going on here? Okay. If flags, you have to search from docs. Okay. So people will test you to help them that they cannot see their passwords when they type. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. When you are typing in that thing. So flags is actually writing everything yourself now. Made me learn and understand Django more better. Oh, cool. Django admin dashboard is a blessing. I agree. Say, oh yes, but I finished building my project with Flax before I heard of Flax admin. Okay, I do not even know about Flax admin. So does that mean I do not have to necessarily know SQL when using Django? Yes, you don't write any line of SQL in Django. All you need to know is to write your Django models and understand how they are going to play out. But yeah, I mean, if you have knowledge of SQL, it helps a lot because modeling, your creating your model itself and the relationships, at least having a good knowledge of databases in itself is very helpful. Yeah. Say this year we no go agree for anybody. So you say it must be registered. Yes. So that is exactly what we are doing right now. It must be registered in the admin. You mean the raw SQL? You're not going to write raw SQL, as I'm saying, but yeah, it's always good to have knowledge of it. All right. Please, a Python manage.py SQL migrate. Can I see that command again? Okay, so I said if you do not even you are not sure how to use it, you just run python manage.py then SQL migrate, and the error message will give you a clue. So the error message said that the required arguments that we needed to provide are app label and the migration file's name. So in our case, the app label, the app that we're dealing with was blog. And the migration file that we're dealing with, when you look into this folder, was the 0001 underscore initial. So I simply wrote Python manage. So let me put it down here. I'm not going to run it again, but Python manage.py, then SQL migrate. And remember, this is just to see the SQL code that will be rendered. When you do it, it doesn't actually run the SQL code. It just shows you if you run this migration file, if you migrate this file, this is the SQL code that will be rendered. So you call the app, in our case, is called block. Then you put the actual file, migration file, underscore what initial. So yeah, that's all. Then I hit enter. That's what I did. I hope you got it. Let me see if I can copy it from here and paste it in the chat for you. Okay, I hope that is helpful. All right, so let's get back to writing our code. Now we've registered our Django, sorry, we've registered our model, the blog model. We've registered it in the admin site. So does it automatically appear? Let's refresh this and see. And now you can see that there is a database table here called blocks. So as simple as that, let's click into it. Oh, 0 blocks. We don't have anything in here. Why? Were you expecting something in there? We haven't created anything, so it makes sense to have 0 blocks. But the admin dashboard here is so helpful that it gives us the plus icon here for us to be able to add a block. And to add a block here, we have title, we have content. You remember that we had in our models, we gave it title, content, created as, updated at. Currently, we can only see test title and content. We can't see created art and updated art. And it makes sense for us not to see this because of how they behave. Here, we have given it the auto now, add and auto now. They will automatically get their values as soon as you create these things. So those ones are supposed to be hidden. They are not showing for you to add your own data or anything. That's why they are not showing. Okay, so let's say my first blog post from admin dashboard. Then the content will say, here is the content for my first blog post from the admin dashboard. Okay, so if we go ahead and save this, voila, we have saved it. And we have one. Let's create another one. And say second blog, hmm, second blog post from admin dashboard, right? Here is also the, let me go and get Lorem. That thing, I'm pretty sure if they had not brought it, programmers will not get anything to write in this word. Copy some. Okay, good job. Let's go. Let's save. So now we have saved two blog posts, but which one is which? This one is saying blog object one, blog object two. It's going to be difficult. Imagine we have thousands of these. How do I know that this is a specific blog? As in cases where I want to edit it, I want to edit a particular one. How do I know it? Meanwhile, we could have easily identified them with the title. So can we do it such that it's just the title that shows up here and not this blog object thing, right? That is possible. If you know anything object-oriented programming in Python, this should be a cool chop. The object representation that you are seeing can be overridden with the help of a Danda method known as str. You guys remember this from your Python lessons. Let's pass self to it. We are creating a method. You know the reason why you use self. If you do not know any of these, I was going to say something, but no. If you do not know any of these, say please feel free to say Lorem Lifesaver. I agree. It's a lifesaver for lazy developers like us. Yeah. But if you do not understand these things, oh my, I have a meeting in 10 minutes. So I have to try and wrap up. Yeah. If you do not understand any of these specific object-oriented programming stuff in Python, I think I started a session like that. I did a session, I think two different sessions on OOP in Python, and I break it down. If you are enjoying this, I believe you would enjoy that lesson. So feel free to check it out on the YouTube channel as well. But here we can go ahead and return what we really want. And all we want is this particular object in the form of its title. So we want the title and not that which they have written over there. Let's save this and now come and refresh what we have here. Hopefully that works. So now it gives us the title, right? We have second blog post from admin dashboard and my first blog post from admin dashboard. Okay. We have please let me pause a bit and see if you have any questions. Go ahead and ask your questions. Say space, please space the video before you go. As in the link. Dog has a very good sense. Anyway, thank you guys. Yeah. So when you say the video, are you referring to that of OP? If yes, I'll see. But please, do you have any questions? Let me see if you have any questions because I have another meeting in less than 10 minutes. Do you have any questions that we should deal with? There are
Yeah,
two.
from
Okay,
the
sure.
SQL migrate there.
Mhm.
That's why I got lost.
from the SQL
SQL
migrate.
migrate. Yeah,
Okay,
when I
so I
ran it,
mhm.
nothing showed up. That means it worked, right?
SQL migrate. No. So I'm saying that the SQL migrate, I showed you just to show you the SQL commands that will be run, right? So it is not necessarily something that you are going to be doing all the time. If you're interested in, if I run this migration, what SQL command is going to be run? That's when you do the SQL migrate. So it's not part of your routine steps. The steps involve, so in summary, what we have done today, the steps are first create a model. You've created your model. The next thing is to make the migration file. So you use the make migrations command. Then after that, you migrate. So you just say Python manage.py migrate, and it's migrate. That is, it creates the database for you. That is where we finished. Then we created a super user. That super user, you create it once. Now that we have created a super user, if we go ahead and create another model, we do not need to create another super user. So the steps will now move from after migration, we can go ahead and access it here. But before we see it, we have to register it in the admin app. So you go to admin.py for that particular app and you register. That's the way that we went about it, right? So if you have gotten to migrate, it means that you had already done the make migration. So the next thing will be just the migrate itself, not SQL migrate. So do migrate, Python manage.py migrate, and that will migrate it. Then create your super user. After you are done, you come into admin.py for your app and do the registration. Admin is already imported for you. You want to register your model in the admin site. So you say admin.site.register, and that will be registered over there. Make sense? All right. I really wish I could teach the last two things before we go, but man, got to run. What do I do? What do I do? Yeah, guys, any other questions? But now you have seen how to add your blog post here. What I was going to teach, the two main things I wanted to teach is, apart from using the admin interface, is there another way that we can add stuff? And yes, there is a way that we can add content without necessarily using the admin interface. And I was going to use that one to teach you how to access or manipulate the data in your database. Then eventually, how do we get these things in our browser? Sorry, in our view as we want. Okay. So let me try quickly and see how we can do that. Maybe we can end with that. Then the next time we would look at manipulating, because I have 5 minutes to run. Okay, so now there is, see, if anything at all and you're confused, when I run the manage.py and it brings up this, please, it's not part, I'm just showing you exactly what is available, right? One of the commands here is the shell. And the shell will allow us to interact with our database without necessarily, I mean, not just get the data, manipulate it the way we want. Like you create data, you update, you delete, all of that, right? So if you have come across this terminology before, I think I've even mentioned it during the stream before. Some people call it CRUD, others call it crude, depending on who taught you English. So where C is create, R is read, U is update, and D is delete. We can perform all of these through the shell. So let's quickly spin up the shell. That would be Python manage.py shell. All right, now we have access to the shell. The first thing we want to do is import our model, right? Our model is from, so we say from blog underscore, wait, oh my, blog underscore, no wait, sorry guys, I think I've forgotten exactly. Oh god, I mean, I'm coming, let me cross check something. Um, come on. Otherwise, we may have to skip it and come back to it the next time. I really wanted to. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay, okay. Yes. So I think I get it. Sorry, sorry. So it is from the models. We are importing a model from the models. I was now confused about the name. So models from blog.models, then we are going to import what's the name of our model? It's called blog, right? We're going to import blog if we do not get any issues. Yes. Then now we have access to blog. That's the first thing that we want to do. So even in your views, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to import blog. What you're interested in is importing the model that you're interested in. Then once you have the model, Django has something known as a manager, a model manager that is used to manage this. I think in another language, which there's something was called a handler, or even in SQL, no, SQL Alchemy, I think, a cursor. In SQL Alchemy, we had something similar called a cursor. Those of you who have done that before. Okay, so for models in Django, we have a model manager, and the manager in Django is by default objects. So if I want anything from this model, I'll just say blog dot objects. That's all. And now, what do I want from this? So this is the manager. The object is the manager of this particular model, right? And with the help of it, I can now get access to anything I want. So if I want all the data, I'll just say all like that. So these methods are something that we should learn. That is what we do with the the ORM. So now we are using an object, and there are various methods that we can use to manipulate data that is in the database. So all will help us get, sorry, manager object is not callable. Why is it not callable? What are you saying? Uh, but
Dog, remove the calling braces.
oh. All right, thank you very much. Yeah. So shouldn't have any ones here. It's just objects, right? That's the manager. Okay. So now it gives us the various objects in here. So it's a list of objects. When we retrieve, or it comes in as a list of objects. So we have the first object, which is this one, and the second object, which is this, right? If we want the exact details in this, instead of using all like that, we could have said blog dot objects dot, then instead of all, yes, so we'll call all, but we are interested in the value. So we could say values like that, and that will give us all the details in it. But it's more of a list of dictionaries. And if you remember, we did a similar thing in our view. So I do not want to confuse anyone, but I hope you can follow it. If we go into our views, let's go. So into our views where we had the blog archive here, we created our own list of dictionaries, right? So now it's a similar thing that we are getting from this. This means that in this view here, we can go ahead and import from models. Let's import blog, right? And instead of manually adding what is it? This blog post list of dictionaries of our blog post, we can go ahead and say blog post is equal to, then this time around, let's call blog and say dot objects dot all. We want everything in it. Then we are interested in the values, which will come as a list of, let's see, okay. which will come as a list of what? A list of Python dictionaries. So essentially, we've replaced this with the data that is coming from our database. And we do not necessarily even need to make any other changes because the context is being passed the way we wanted it to be passed. If we go to our app and let's go to our blog and see. So you can see my first blog post from admin dashboard, second blog post from admin dashboard. So this is now coming from the database itself and not what we put here originally. So originally this is what it was. Let's get this and now comment this out and let's refresh it. You see what I'm talking about. So originally we had this data. There were about 3 of them. And now we have converted this to that which is coming from our database itself just by adding the simple line. So if you want all the values, this is how you get it. Maybe we are going to pause here, then later we'll look at how to access all the other things. But yep, we can see that if I refresh this, posted by on that data is not coming because we do not have anything like that. So we go into templates, get into index.html and write in here. For now, we haven't added authors, so we cannot change that, but our title is right. We do not have a field called date, but we have created at or updated at any of them that you want. So we can pass that. And yep, I think we are good. Let's refresh this. You should see the dates coming up. Yep. So now the date is coming up, but we don't have the author. So subsequently, we'll look at how to add the author. But let me give you the assignment. So this is okay. I don't know if you are okay to go and do the assignments, but yeah, you should be able to research. If I haven't taught you, I've opened the door for you. So now when you research, you understand it. If I want a particular blog post, right? I could say, let's say selected blog post is equal to call my model blog dot then the handler or the manager in terms of Django blog dot object dot then you can use get and give it say the ID. So when the ID is equal to 1, they should I say 11 or 1. I want 1. So now it has selected it. Sorry. So there is nothing like ID 11 in our database right now. That's why it threw this error. But when we said 1, no error came. So that means that we have data in this particular one. Let's confirm that. Say selected underscore blog. Let's look for the attribute title and see if it really has that. And you can see that the title is my first blog post from admin. So that is how we can get just one item with its specific ID. So I want you to get into the views for rendering the blog post, the single blog post here. Here, what we were doing was we're trying to get the selected post from amongst this. So this time around, you should be able to get rid of all of this, right? All of that. Okay. Up to here, right? And simply go to select it. Let's see, your selection will be selected post should be equal to your blog model dot the manager, which is object dot get, then you're passing an ID to it, right? But the ID should be equal to whatever is being passed here, which is the article ID. And once that has been set, we are good now. Everything else works as we want it. So now if we come here and let's refresh and click on this, oh no, something went wrong again. Context must be a dictionary rather than blog. Okay. So the data that is coming is not coming in a form of a dictionary. I bet that I've shown you. No, my time is way past 5 minutes past my start of meeting time. So now you know that this is coming as an object, right? Can you convert it into a dictionary that will be sent as the contest? Let's do that as part of the assignment, and let's meet in the next session. I'll communicate it, but I've exceeded my time here. So sorry about that. We need to, yeah. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, know that we are having this session on Zoom and we'll have it regularly. So if you want to, you can join the, now as I can see you. I can see you in Zoom and I can see you on YouTube. Interesting. Okay. So then SWM invite, you can use this link oniaobe.com/SWM-invite to join the WhatsApp group. And I'm going to be stopping the stream here and hopefully we'll continue some other time. Says, please paste the video for me. I don't have any questions. Okay, I saw something like serializers on the doc page, or we will look into it later. Later. Serializers are used to convert your code into JSON. Yeah. What if I forget my admin credentials? Can I recover it, or I just recreate another admin profile? I haven't thought about it, but I believe you should be able to recreate it. Except that if you have user specific stuff, I don't think you'll be able to recover it. But I haven't experienced that. Django is really interesting. I'll go over again to grab better. Yeah, quite interesting. Same here, I've decided to go through all the docs. All right. I feel in love with it and I'm not regretting. Good to hear. All right. So guys, I think we'll bring our session to an end here. Let me stop for our next meeting. Oh, where is the stop? Stop. Where are you? This Zoom stuff.